All right, let's get after it on a Friday. You're listening to Taking the Field with Stevie Mac, episode 5 of the podcast here. So a couple things I want to get to today. I want to preview kind of my thoughts on the Michigan-Notre Dame game, as well as Michigan State, Penn State, and kind of what that game means moving forward for Michigan State specifically as they currently sit 4-3 on the 2019 season. Then I'll touch on Wisconsin, Ohio State as well a little bit before we head into segment 2, which will be the Big Ten football picks versus polls segment, where I compete against the Twitter polls that I put out each week about the different Big Ten football games going on around the conference and who you think will win each of those games and who I think will win each of those games, and we kind of battle it out to see who wins each week. Currently in that, I hold an 8-7 lead over the polls. But let's get to some of these games here that I mentioned real quick, starting with Michigan and Notre Dame. I think last week for Michigan against Penn State, you played pretty well. I thought you played very well outside of the first quarter and a half. I think that was a game that you really could have won had you not gotten down 21-0. I think that's really where you kind of killed yourself, was having to come back in the second half down 21-7. But I just don't think that you can do that. I don't think that whether you're home or away, it doesn't matter. You cannot get down 21-0, and you cannot do it, especially in an environment like that where you're at Penn State in a whiteout at night when the crowd is just lit up like they were and like they usually are in those kinds of environments. You cannot put yourself behind like that and expect to be able to come back and win. Now, they did have a chance, and there will be no Ronnie Bell bashing on this podcast. I will not have it. But you did have a chance, I will admit. Yes, Penn State got away with some questionable no calls as far as holding and pass interference on defense. Number 5 specifically, I thought, got away with it several times in the second half. But even still, I can't fully blame that as the reason you lost. I can't solely blame Ronnie Bell for dropping that ball. I can't solely blame the referees for having some severely inconsistent calls in that game that were essentially one-sided at times towards Michigan. I can't do it because it all comes back to, if you don't go down 21-0, you have a chance. Because in the second half, you were flat out the better team. Offense, defense, you were better. So you gotta start better and give yourself more of a chance going forward the rest of the way, because if they played the second half like they did the first quarter and a half, Michigan wins by 10 or 14. And that's the difference. You get down 21-0, you're done. Now you're trying to catch up, you're trying to scratch and claw your way back in at the rest of the game, and you get the kind of result that you got, where you had a chance, but that was only to tie the game up. And you don't know what's going to happen once you go to overtime. So you got to start out better, and that's kind of been what we've said almost all season, outside of maybe like Rutgers and Illinois, is you have to learn to start better. Yes, they got better as the game went along. That's cool. We saw them start to kind of get comfortable in this offense. The offense started doing some things. They made some plays. Patterson had probably his best game of the season in a game that was actually significant, meaning not against Illinois or Rutgers. But it still wasn't enough because of the way that you started that game. So I think you come out tomorrow against Notre Dame, do exactly what you did last week. Just find a way to not be down 21-0. Come out with a hotter start than you did against Penn State, and I think you win that game. I think you win it by 10 points if you do, because you showed last week that you can go into a game like that and just flat out be the better team if you play a complete game. And in games like that against Wisconsin, against Penn State, against Iowa, you haven't had a complete game like that. So I think that this could be that game where you finally come out and just say, look, we're just flat out better than these guys. Like, you can say what you want, excuse me, about how Harbaugh hasn't won a big game or he doesn't beat his rivals or things like that, but we're going to take this stage on Saturday night under the lights in the big house, and we're going to just show we're better. You know, we saw what we did against Penn State. We saw what we did well. We're better. Now, if you look at Michigan State, they're going to be playing Penn State tomorrow. And for whatever reason, Michigan State has really had Penn State's number the past couple of years, even in games that they probably didn't deserve to win because they weren't necessarily the better team when you look at, you know, the grand scheme of how their seasons both turned out. Like last year, for example, you know, Penn State was the better team last year when you look at it overall. But on that one day, Michigan State found a way to go in there and get it done. And that's what this game kind of feels like to me, is that Penn State's just the flat-out better team. But for some reason, it wouldn't surprise me if Michigan State at home found a way to get it done and beat Penn State. Do I think it'll happen? No. But I'll get to that in my picks segment later. I don't think it'll happen, but it wouldn't really surprise me at all if it did, because they've done it in the past. And they've done it on the road. But I think that when you look at it, they're sitting at 4-3. This is the kind of game that they have to have in order to turn their season around in a way. Because after this, you still got to go on the road and play Michigan. So if you lose both those games, the best you're going to do this year is 7-5. And I think that for any Michigan State fan, the last thing you want to do is go back-to-back years of 7 wins. So I think this is one of those games where you have to have it. You have to find a way to scratch and claw and fight your way to a win, even if you're not the better team in this case like they weren't last year. But I think that this is the kind of game that when you go forward the rest of your season, this is the kind of game that you have to have at home. You have to win this game and say, hey, look, you know, we're still a good football team. We can still win these kinds of games. You know, we're not dead yet. We still have something to play for this year. We still have games that we can win. We can still turn this thing around. But if you lose tomorrow, you're done. Because you're probably going to lose to Michigan. That already sets you at 5 losses. So the best you're going to do in that case is 7-5 for a second year in a row. And I think that a lot of Michigan State fans would just sigh at that point. You know, almost kind of feel sorry for themselves at that point. And I think there would also be a lot of people calling for Mark D'Antonio's job if they did that, because in the last 4 years you would have 3-9, 7-6, and 7-5, depending on what they do in a bowl game. And realistically, if you're staring down 7-5, you're most likely not even going to make it out of the state of Michigan. You're probably going to end up at Ford Field playing in the Motor City Bowl or the Little Caesars Bowl or whatever the heck they call it now, because they've changed it like 5 times in the last 8 years. And you'll end up playing some, you know, top-end MAC school in that game. So I think that this game tomorrow means a lot for where your season goes these last 5 games or so. Because, no, you're not going to win the Big Ten. You know, you're not going to go to a Rose Bowl or anything crazy like that. But you still have a chance to make a statement and finish out the season strong after you limped into the second half of the year at 4-3. And then, real quick, taking a look at this Wisconsin versus Ohio State game, this is interesting because you have Wisconsin at 6-1 and Minnesota at 7-0. And if Wisconsin were to lose this game and then go on to the last week of the season at 9-2 overall, I have Minnesota also going into the last week of the season at 9-2. They square off in that last game of the year for Paul Bunyan's axe. If both those teams go into that game 9-2, the winner will go to the Big Ten championship game as the West Division representative. And I would find it absolutely mind-blowing if PJ Fleck in year 3 at Minnesota were able to get to a Big Ten championship game before Jim Harbaugh, who's in year 5. I mean, it would just be absolutely mind-blowing if this were to happen. And when you look at it, after Wisconsin lost to Illinois last week and they got Ohio State coming up tomorrow, it's not that crazy to say that if Minnesota just continues to handle their business, yeah, they might lose to Iowa. Yeah, they'll probably lose to Penn State. But if they do, then seeing what that game against Wisconsin at the end of the year will mean for the Big Ten and for Minnesota, that's huge. Because that's something that, again, I'm not the biggest Harbaugh critic, but I'm also not his greatest fan either. I just would find it, as a Michigan fan, absolutely mind-blowing that this guy was able to come in here and do it in 3 years at a program like Minnesota, who doesn't even get half the recruits you do. In fact, he actually kind of gets Michigan's leftover because Ben St. Juste, one of Michigan's former safeties, transferred there. You know, the guy doesn't get nearly the recruits you do. He's playing in the same division as Wisconsin, and yet he finds a way to do it. I mean, that would just be absolutely unreal. Now, he hasn't done it yet. There's still 5 games to go, so Minnesota could head for a complete and utter collapse the second half of the season, but the way things are right now, it's not totally crazy to suggest he might do it. You know? So the last thing I want to get to here in just a second are my Big Ten football picks versus polls. We'll talk about that. Got some really interesting games this week. Some big ones, too, as I mentioned, Michigan, Notre Dame, Penn State, Michigan State, and Wisconsin against Ohio State. So we'll get to those and some of the others on Taking the Field with Stevie Mack. All right, welcome back into episode 5 of Taking the Field with Stevie Mack. This is the Big Ten Picks vs. Polls segment I've been doing the last couple weeks, where I compete against my Twitter polls to see who wins each week picking Big Ten football matchups. So let's get to some of the picks here, starting with Liberty and Rutgers. The vote was actually tied at 6 votes apiece between Liberty and Rutgers. So I'm going to make the decision here. I'll give you guys Rutgers, and I believe Liberty is going to pull off the upset here on the road against Rutgers. I think they're going to just kind of kick Rutgers while they're down. They're currently 1-6 overall on the season. They're playing with an interim head coach. So I think Liberty at 5-2 is going to go on the road, and they're going to take care of business against a defeated Rutgers squad. Then let's look at Ohio State, Wisconsin. Ohio State, number 3 at 7-0, taking on number 13, 6-1, Wisconsin. Ohio State was the pick there for you guys, so you guys take Ohio State. I as well will take Ohio State in that one. Like I said, I think that Wisconsin's going to lose back-to-back games for the first time in as long as I can remember, and they're going to go into that game at the end of the year on the road at Minnesota, the winner having the chance to go to the Big Ten championship game. The next game is Illinois at Purdue. Illinois obviously coming off that big win a week ago against Wisconsin, handing them their first loss of the year. But Illinois comes in at 3-4. They go on the road to 2-5 Purdue. The polls picked Illinois in that one with 67% of the vote. I as well will take Illinois in that game. I think they're going to be, extremely high energy coming off that win against Wisconsin. I think compared to Wisconsin, Purdue is going to be a walk in the park for them. So I got Illinois in that game as well. The next one is number 20, Iowa at Northwestern. Iowa comes in 5-2. Northwestern sitting at 1-5. And I really expected a lot more of Northwestern this year, and I've been proven to be horribly, horribly wrong about that. But I really like Iowa, so I'm going to go Iowa, as are the polls. They had 80% of the vote, so we both take Iowa in that one. The next one is Indiana at Nebraska. Indiana 5-2, Nebraska 4-3. The polls once again were split at 50% of the vote between the two. So I'll let you guys take Nebraska. I know you picked Nebraska a few weeks ago against Minnesota. By the way, how'd that turn out for you? And I'm going to take Indiana. I really like Indiana and what they've done this year. I thought they looked really good against Michigan State on the road. Then again, we also kind of thought Michigan State was going to be better than what they are to this point, but I thought they looked really good. I thought Michael Penix Jr. looked like a stud in that game. I really like him, so I'll take Indiana in that one. Got a couple more games here real quick. Maryland at number 17, Minnesota. You and I both agreed. 67% of the vote says 60% of the vote, says row the boat, baby, to 8-0 over Maryland. Maryland coming in 3-4 into that game. Then we got number 6 Penn State at MSU. Penn State 7-0, MSU 4-3. 67% of the vote says Penn State to go 8-0. I as well will take them 8-0, although like I said in the last segment, I wouldn't be very much surprised if Michigan State found a way to get it done in that game and win that game, even though, let's be honest, they really have no business winning that game, but they've done it in years past. They did it just as recently as last year on the road at Penn State. So then the last game is the night game, number 8 Notre Dame at number 19 Michigan. Notre Dame 5-1, Michigan 5-2, coming off that loss to Penn State. 70% of the vote took Notre Dame on this one. I don't disagree with that. I understand where you're coming from with that. I'm going to go the other way. I'm going to be a part of that 30% that chose Michigan. I'm going to take Michigan because I think that they have some confidence even after losing a game like that to Penn State. I think that they saw that their offense can go out there against a legitimate top 15 type team with a good defense, and they can be able to make plays. They can move the ball down the field. They can put some points up on the board. I think that tomorrow it's all about just being more consistent and playing a more 60-minute game on that side of the ball. I think if Michigan does that, they easily win this game by 10 points. So I'll take Michigan in that game. So that is the picks for this week. As I mentioned, I currently cling to an 8-7 lead after 2 weeks of doing the picks. So we'll come back here next Friday and revisit the picks from this week and update the scoreboard on where we're at after the third week of this. And this was the Taking the Field podcast with Stevie Mack. Thanks for listening.